Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending and welcome, and thank you for attending our IESBA global webinar for using the work of an external expert. My name is Kam Leung, and I'm a staff at the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, IESBA for short. Online, we also have, together with us, the chair of the IESBA, Gabriella, here online, and we also have our vice chair, Laurie, and IESBA board member, Saadiya. And so without much further ado, I will pass to Gabriella. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kam, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of those attending this global seminar. First thing that I wanted to say is to thank you for your time and for your interest in attending this seminar and knowing more about the exposure draft that the IESBA has released a few weeks ago on the use of the work of an external expert. Thank you very much for attending, and I really hope that this seminar is going to be useful for you. Well, my name is Gabriella Figueiredo. I'm the chair of the IESBA since January 2022, so it's been 2 years more or less, and I'm proud to be here presenting this exposure draft on the use of the work of an external expert, because it really means a great step forward in direction of where we want to be, and where we want to be is serving the public interest the most that we can. This is our purpose, this is our mission, this is our vision at the IESBA, and that's what we are doing with the development of these draft standards being put out for consultation. Now, what's the reason for why we decided to organize this global webinar? I think it's very easy to understand that we need to be inclusive. We need to include all our stakeholders, irrespective of their the regions, their jurisdictions, their backgrounds, and etc. So this is really an opportunity for all our stakeholders to participate, to understand more about what is being proposed. This is part of our commitment to extensive outreach and to an intensive and continued dialogue with our stakeholders. And we really need and aim at having meaningful, informed responses to our exposure draft. And this is only possible if we are available to our stakeholders to explain, to make them understand, to respond to questions, etc. We really need your responses, and we need your responses to be informed, and that you understand what is there, what is being proposed, so that the responses that we will get will help us developing the final standards in a very robust, inclusive, and meaningful way. But also, this is also about preparing the future, because we really believe that with these global webinars, while helping stakeholders understanding what is being proposed, and therefore helping ourselves finalizing the standards, this is also about helping stakeholders starting to understand how in the future should these standards be approved, and should there be aligned more or less with what we are being proposed. This can be already very helpful for the future implementation and usage of these standards. So all these reasons led the IESBA to organize this global webinar, and all of you are very welcome to this moment with us. So just a very short word about the standards themselves. This is as Kam has indicated, the exposure draft on using the work of an external expert, and it proposes an ethical framework to guide professional accountants or other practitioners, and I'll go to that topic, in evaluating whether an external expert has the necessary competence, the necessary objectivity, and the necessary capabilities, so that his or her work can be used for the intended purposes by the professional accountant or other practitioner. This proposal also includes some provisions on applying the code's conceptual framework, but I'm not going to go into the technicalities. I'm very well supported and in the company of people who will much better than me explain everything about that. I just wanted to tell you about the background of these standards and of the IESBA decision. For some time now, we had been requested a call from some stakeholders to reinforce the existing framework for external experts. And this is because the concerns about the need to ensure absolutely robust, independent, and objective information being provided to investors, users, consumers, etc., also needs to consider the work used, or the work of experts used by those performing or engaging in the sustainability in the information. This was made more important while we developed sustainability-related standards, because, as you all know, sustainability will bring a lot of work from the experts into the arena. The complexity, the newness of the sustainability issues will imply that all those providing services in this area will necessarily, most of the time, use the work of external experts. So it's going to be a mainstream, it's going to be recurrent, and we need to make sure that in all the situations where the work of these experts will be used, there will be the necessary framework to support the ones using that work, making sure that this does not impair the objectivity of the information or of the assurance engagement. So this is relevant and extremely relevant for the future framework on sustainability, but we should not forget that in many other areas, as things change and the environment evolves, like technology, like in tax and etc., the same is happening. The complexity of the issues and the rapid changes in many areas forces the accountants and other providers to get to ask for the work of external experts and to use them in many areas. So this is going to be, it is our conviction that this is going to be an important standard. What will change? What will change is that hopefully the framework in terms of the objectivity of the information provided and the use of the conceptual framework will be significantly reinforced. Who is going to be interested in these standards? Well, the webinars provide useful information, and the standards will hopefully be important and useful for different groups of stakeholders, but I would highlight, of course, the professional using this work, but also regulators, preparers of sustainability information, sustainability assurance practitioners, but also tax planning services providers, and professional accountants working matters related with technology, to say the least. So all these areas will make these standards relevant. So I'll stop here, but not before thanking this group of people who are here today, especially Laurie Endsley, my vice chair, my esteemed vice chair, who has been the chair and is the chair of the task force developing these standards in a very short time frame. So with a reinforced thank you for the amazing work done, but also Kam Leung from the staff, who has been holding the pen for this project, literally, and making it develop with a very robust technical approach and careful addressing all the topics. And Saadiya Adam, who is a member of the task force, a board member, and who has been also instrumental, critical for the robustness of the proposals that you are going to hear about today. So I'll stop here. This is not my room. This is not my time. I just wanted to greet everybody and convey a positive and strong message about the importance of these standards, but also and mainly about the importance of having you all here. We all now have more than 200 people attending. Thank you all. And with this, I wish you a very good webinar, and I'll give the floor to my vice chair, esteemed friend, Laurie Endsley, to tell you more about the standards. Thank you all, and have a good
Gabriella, thank you so much for joining us for that intro, and that sets us up perfectly to go into our discussion today. And I'd like to thank all of the participants for taking time out to join today as we begin this journey of working through helping people understand the exposure draft and getting really great comments in to help us shape the final standard as it is developed. So we're thrilled to be here today to discuss the exposure draft in more detail, sort of as a kickoff. The exposure draft, I'm using the work of external experts. Today, we're going to take you through key elements of the exposure draft. And that will be followed by time to address questions. So please let us know via the question function throughout the process any questions you might have. We've, as Kam noted, we've reserved time at the end to address those questions. So if we go to the next slide, Kam, why the Use of Experts project? Let's start with why we're developing this. Gabriella discussed this a little bit. Why we need a standard with regard to use of external experts. Our goal is to develop a principle-based ethical framework to provide PAs and other assurance providers an approach to determine whether the use of an expert is appropriate from an ethical perspective, including the fundamental principle of objectivity, which underlies this, which includes consideration of independence. So when we think about why, we have to look at our current code, the current position we're at. The code addresses a small slice of the issues involved around this, independence for experts consulted on an audit or assurance. But there are big gaps in the code today. External experts are not covered either in audit assurance, in NAS, or external experts used by PAIBs. And the ISAs address pieces of this, but again, in a smaller way, and they don't address in detail the ethical considerations. Very clearly, we've discussed, and we will continue to discuss throughout this, the importance of the ethical considerations, which are increasing daily. Both concerns have been raised around whether experts can be reasonably relied upon. And with the increased use of experts, given sustainability and other things going on, it seemed to be the right time to address it. So where's the code heading right now? At a high level, we're looking at independence for experts consulted on audit or assurance, which obviously exists, but there'll be much more framework around that. Competence, capabilities, and objectivities for external experts used in any professional service, okay, not just audit or assurance, but adding additional rigor for external experts whose work is used in audit or assurance, including sustainability assurance engagements, as well as external experts used by PAIBs. It was clear, as I mentioned, even before sustainability work started to become prevalent and the development of standards in the sustainability space took place, that concerns were being raised externally about use of experts. But with that sustainability work increasing, the use of experts is increasing as well. So it really is time to address the existing concerns, plus developing a standard which is fit for purpose for the use of experts going forward. The task force is very, very aware of the need to get the balance right here. The need to be confident that we can rely on experts that are being used by professionals. There's a strong public interest here. At the same time, we're aware in the crafting process that there are long-term implications whenever you put a standard in place. So we're really looking for a targeted proportional approach that balances that very important public interest with the practical implications of putting a standard in place. We started this journey, Kam, if you want to go to the next slide, just a little over a year ago when the IESBA approved the project plan. We had our very first meeting 1 year ago this month, and since then have been developing various iterations of drafts and seeking feedback from not just the IESBA board, but the CAG and global roundtables that took place last March and April around use of experts and sustainability. As many of you will know, the exposure draft was issued in late January, and we're now in the comment period. And following that, we'll be looking to understand the themes and comments we hear, and as Gabriella noted, revise the text so that we can get to a final sustainability or expert standard that is really fit for purpose for what we need. Very importantly, we've worked closely in terms of coordination with the IEESB, which, as you know, has certain standards which touch on this topic. Our proposals from the IESBA focus on the ethics-related considerations versus the performance of audit or assurance procedures. However, there are links we've ensured that we avoid conflict with ISA 620 and other relevant IAASB standards, as well as ISSA 5000 proposals. The final IAASB 5000 will take into account developments on this project. And lastly, the strategy and work plan for the IAASB considers whether any adjustments will need to be made. So to be sure, we will stay aligned, the two groups, to ensure that standards read well together and cover the gist of what needs to be covered for everyone. I'm now going to hand over to Saadiya Adam, who's going to take us through some details as we work through this. So again, keep thinking of questions you may have. Saadiya, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Laurie. Greetings to everyone on the call. In an audit and assurance practice, the work of an expert is not a new concept. So you may have already had experience in this area. Therefore, I think it's important for us to reaffirm how the IESBA code and professional accountants are currently addressing these ethical considerations when using the work of an expert. So in the next few slides, we're going to recap on certain of the amendments and clarifications from the recent revisions to the code relating to the definition of engagement team and group audit. Next slide, please. Sorry, this diagram may be familiar. It is often used to visually depict the different individuals in an engagement team and an audit team. It also illustrates the different roles experts play in an audit engagement. You would notice that there's three groups that need some emphasis. The first group is individuals who perform audit procedures. So these are individuals who generally have some audit expertise and they fall part of the engagement team. That means they are subject to independence. So these are the individuals in the second blue box on your left. The next group is the individuals with expertise in accounting and other technical or industry-specific matters who provide consultations. These individuals can directly influence the outcome of the engagement and fall within the remit of an audit team. Those individuals are since they're part of the audit team, are subject to independence, and they can be found in the middle clear box on your right. The third group of experts, which I call the external experts, have specifically been excluded from the definition of audit team engagement team. So this means that the independence requirements are not applicable. Next slide. So paragraph 411 is an extract of the code, and it explains these individuals and the roles that they may play in words. So the same individual and having the competence may fall within either of these roles depending on the role that he or she plays. Did she perform audit procedures? Example, an income tax expert is called in to analyze a complex information and identify unusual transactions or relationships. Or did the engagement lead to a direct influence over the outcome of the audit engagement through this consultation or industry specific? So example, the income tax expert is consulted on a complex transaction. You can see the emphasis is not on the person, but on the role that that individual played in the engagements. So in both circumstances, that individual is not considered an external expert, but has been captured in the definition of engagement team or an audit team, respectively. Next slide, please. So the emphasis on the varying roles is important because we need to know whether these individuals are subject to independence or whether they are these external experts that our new proposals will address. So external experts until now have not been specifically addressed, but the proposed ethics provisions in Section 390 and 5390 will specifically become applicable as we go on with this project. But to understand whether you are within the remit of an audit team or an engagement team is something that has been closely already considered. And the IESBA staff has already put together a few question and answers to address the matters that have been asked, how do you make this analysis and conclude whether they are part of the engagement team and audit team? As you can see from a glimpse of these frequently asked questions, it's still dependent on the facts and circumstances of that engagement and the role that the expert performs. Next slide. So being able to identify an expert in an audit and assurance team and understanding which part of the code applies is an important step to understanding the proposals. Are they within this section, or have they already been addressed in another section? So while the engagement team and group audit amendments has been helpful in knowing who the external experts are referring to, we should dive a little bit deeper into the question of what are some of these consultations on the outcomes of these engagements. Next slide, please. A professional accountant in audit and assurance may have additional guidance available to them. So as Laurie mentioned, coordination with the IESBA was an important area in drafting these proposals. So we appreciate that a professional accountant in audit and assurance would use the code and the auditing standards in an integrated manner. Thus, it's important to point to some of the extracts of the auditing standards. And in the next slide, we touch on, next slide, please. So according to the International Standards on Quality Management, ISQM1, and the International Standard of Auditing, ISA 220 device, the results of consultation on technical or industry-specific matters must be implemented. This is a crucial step because the firm needs to establish quality objectives, especially in dealing with challenging issues, and to make sure that the conclusions from consultations are not just discussed but implemented. So the engagement partner, among other responsibilities, has to take charge of these consultations and ensure that the agreed upon conclusions have been put into practice. Next slide. So these consultations provide insights or advice into the matters that a professional accountant or assurance practitioner or a sustainability assurance practitioner has come to the conclusion on the audit assurance work. And the IESBA notes that the engagement partner must take these conclusions into considerations and agree that it has been actually carried out. So this kind of gives you guidance on that difference between whether the consultation has led to have significant impact on the engagement. But I think the more important thing to realize from the ethical realm is that it does touch on the application of the conceptual framework, that you need to have an inquiring mind, importantly, exercise professional judgment, and using the reasonable and informed third-party tests. I'll hand you over to Kam, who will walk us through some of these considerations.
Thank you, Saadiya. So before I walk through some of these considerations, I do want to note we have received a question wondering if the slides will be shared with the participants. And yes, the slides will be shared with all participants on this call right now. And also the recording will be available on our website afterwards, along with the slides. You will note that there is a Q&A box in your Zoom panel, so you can submit questions at any time during this webinar, and we will have 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to be able to do a sort of Q&A session based on your questions submitted. So now I will go through the considerations that we have developed to help a PA identify whether an expert is an engagement team member, audit team member, external expert, or what we call an internal expert. And that's really the other bucket when you're not engagement team member, audit team member, or external expert. So this flow chart here starts with the first question you should consider of, are you using an individual? Are you engaging the work of an individual with expertise outside your own competence? And theoretically, the answer should be yes. Otherwise, you wouldn't be considering whether or not you're a engagement team, audit team, or external expert. Then the next question you would ask yourself is the individual with expertise outside your competence, is that individual engaged by the firm? So if the answer is no, that individual is then employed by the firm. And on the next slide, we'll go through the considerations that need to be evaluated for that type of individual. If the answer is yes, the next question you should ask yourself is the individual performing audit procedures, right? So are they producing part of the audit evidence to support the audit opinion? And if the answer is yes, that is an engagement team member. And as Saadiya pointed out, they are subject to the independence required in the code, Part 4A of the code. So subject to independence, auditor independence requirements. If the answer is no, the individual is not performing audit procedures, you need to ask yourself, is the individual performing consultations in accordance, for example, in accordance with the IESBA 220 revised? What does that mean? It means, are you engaging that individual because of the ISQM policies in your firm to perform a consultation whereby the conclusions need to be implemented and agreed? And if they are not implemented and agreed, there is a due process that needs to be gone through in order to ensure that divergent views are decided upon. So if the answer is yes, this member can directly influence the outcome of the audit engagement and therefore is an audit team member. That individual is subject to the independence requirements of the code, again, Part 4A of the code. If the answer is no, you ask yourself, is the individual performing work, and this is a key thing, with expertise that is outside of accounting or auditing to assist you in obtaining appropriate audit evidence? What that means is that, is the individual providing you with work that is essentially a brick of audit evidence that an engagement team member will need to perform audit procedures over to ensure that it can become audit evidence and support the audit opinion. And that work must be outside the realm of accounting and auditing expertise. So if that individual is performing such work, that is an external expert. And the external expert, we have developed these provisions to assess the external expert's objectivity. And the objectivity is assessed through independence attributes based on the code. So this would be the proposed new sections in section 390 and 5390. And then now on the next slide, we will go through the considerations for experts that are employed by the firm. So again, are you using the work of an expert employed by the firm? Presumably the answer is yes. And similarly, is that individual performing audit procedures? Yes, you're an engagement team member subject to independence. No, you ask yourself, is that individual employed by the firm providing consultation in accordance with IESBA 220? That consultation outcome must be implemented. Yes, audit team member and independence is required. If it's no, you would be considered, that individual would be considered an internal expert. So an expert that is employed by the firm, but not performing audit procedures and not providing consultation where the outcome must be implemented given the ISQM objectives. So for these experts, internal experts, they are subject to the firm's overall systems of quality management and overall provisions of the code. Okay, so these are the two flowcharts we've developed to really enable EAs to consider which bucket of experts that individual falls into. Are they subject to independence, or are they subject to the new provisions of the code for external experts, as we pointed out? And so now I'll go into a little bit of what our proposals speak to for external experts. What we've introduced here is, first of all, we've introduced definitions for the term expert and expertise. And that's really because we want to define the scope of what is an expert. And also we want to delineate it from other individuals or organizations that provide information for general use, which is quite common. Then we do, in the provisions, we have a section on evaluating the external expert. And that's the purple box there. And what does this mean? Aligned with the IEESB's provisions, the IESBA also noted that the external expert's competence, capability, and objectivity is critical when you use the work of an external expert. So therefore, the professional accountant needs to evaluate the competence, capability, and objectivity. And for short, you will hear this a lot, we call that CCO. And what is key here is that if the accountant evaluates that the external expert is not competent, capable, or objective, then the professional accountant cannot use the work of that external expert. Essentially, they will need to find another external expert to use who meets the CCO thresholds. And in particular, and this it applies essentially to audits, assurance, other assurance, including reviews. It also applies to non-assurance services, NAS. So that's part 3 of the code. It also applies within the new proposed part 5 sustainability standards. So also when you provide sustainability assurance. And also importantly, it also applies to professional accountants in business. So these provisions will also be included in part 2 of the code. So that's section 290. So again, whenever a professional accountant in business or a professional accountant in practice uses the work of an external expert, CCO must be evaluated, and you cannot use that work if it does not meet CCO. In this little red box, dark red box here, we do have a section on evaluating external experts in audit or assurance. And as Laurie mentioned earlier, this was really to address the public interest questions around, when external experts are used in audit and assurance, should they, how can there be some robust safeguards to protect the objectivity of these external experts so that they are just as independent as the engagement team and audit team. So there are additional objectivity requirements within the proposals based on the independence attributes of the code that the professional accountant needs to evaluate before they can use the work of that external expert. And that is to evaluate whether that external expert is objective. And finally, this orange box here focuses on the provisions based on the conceptual framework of the code is when the accountant actually does use the work of the external expert, what are the threats to the fundamental principles that might be created and how they can be addressed. So here, as I mentioned, we introduced some new definitions. I'll go through them here. For the there's a new definition of expertise. Expertise is defined as knowledge and skills in a particular field. The ISA 620 does also define expertise as knowledge, skills, and experience in a particular field. In developing this definition, the IESBA did go through much literature, including layman dictionary definitions, PCAOB definitions, and we did see that in general, expertise is defined as knowledge and skills in a particular field. The experience element of it is used to demonstrate that you do have that expertise. And so that's why you'll see in this proposed definition, we don't have the term experience. However, as Laurie mentioned, we've been coordinating quite closely with the IEESB. They are aware of this, and in due course, they will consider if possible narrow scope amendments are needed to their standards. We also have a proposed new definition of expert. And as you'll see here, it's benchmarked against the PA's own competence. This term expert is used throughout the code already, and as defined, it fits in quite well with how the term is used. So essentially, if the individual possesses expertise that's outside the professional accountant's or sustainability assurance practitioner's competence, then that is an expert, that individual is an expert. We've also revised the definition of external expert. But by revisions, we've just enhanced it. So the underlying concepts continue to align with the ISAs and existing IESBA definitions for engagement team and audit team, etc. So for external experts in audit engagements, they possess expertise in a field outside of accounting or auditing. For assurance engagements, and this is the bit we've added essentially to enhance that definition of external expert, an external expert in an assurance engagement that they possess expertise in a field other than assurance. Consistent with the extant code, these excludes engagement leaders, partners, members of the professional staff, temporary staff of the firm or network firm. And importantly also, when you use these individuals that possess that specific expertise, that work is used to assist the accountant or sustainability assurance practitioner in obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So the professional accountant or sustainability assurance practitioner needs to perform audit or assurance procedures over that external expert's work to ensure that it does, form sufficient appropriate audit evidence. If the accountant deems that that work is not appropriate, then that work cannot be used. Again, external experts are not members of the engagement team, audit team, or review team, assurance team, or sustainability assurance team. Okay, and I will pause here and pass it to Saadiya. Thank you.
Thank you, Kam. So we have heard that these external experts are not within the firm. It is someone that you might have engaged. And this is the reason for why we have introduced the proposed requirement R390.5, because it provides some guidance on how you would agree the terms of engagement from an ethics perspective. So included in here is the nature, scope, and objectives of the work to be performed by the external expert. And in the context of audit and other assurance engagement, which includes sustainability assurance engagements, the provision of information needed from the external expert for the purposes of assessing the accountant's evaluation of the external expert's competence, capabilities, and objectivity, that's the CCO. So the guidance really aims the professional accountant in evaluating the external expert's work, and especially non-assurance services and sustainability assurance services, which is covered in the proposed Part 5 of the code. Emphasis is placed in ensuring that the external expert provides information to facilitate the professional accountant's evaluation of that objectivity. So you may have noticed that the lead-in says, to the extent not otherwise addressed by laws, regulations, or other professional standards. And this is just to make sure that we aren't duplicating what existing standards in the IESBA realm says. And this is from giving context to the ethics perspective that will need to be considered. In the application material to this requirement, we also have suggested things that will become necessary for the professional accountant's evaluation. So those are the expectations of confidentiality, and especially on the expectations on the communication regarding to non-compliance with laws and regulations. Next slide. So the new requirement R390.6 says that if you are a professional accountant, you will need to check if an external expert has got the skills, abilities, and the objectivity necessary. So this is in line with what is already said in ISA 620 and ISA 3000 revised. The IESBA asserts that the competence, capabilities, and objectivity is crucial, not only in audits, but also in other professional services. So while we have been focusing a lot on the audit realm in my previous conversation as well, non-assurance engagements and other things would have to be considered, and even in as a professional accountant in public practice and a PAIB. So when doing this evaluation, the professional accountant needs to be inquisitive. So you need to use your professional judgment and apply the test of the reasonable and informed third party. So essentially, it's about balancing those CCO factors against a specific situation. In case you're wondering what to consider in this evaluation, the proposal includes paragraph 390.6 A2 to A6. So it gives application material on factors to consider and examples on what the information, where this information may be found. So for external experts in audit and assurance engagements, the heightened public interest necessitates additional requirements and application material for that CCO evaluation. Similar provisions are also outlined in the proposed section 5390 for sustainability assurance providers in sustainability assurance engagement in the proposed part 5 of the code. Next slide, please. So some external experts may be individuals, but some may be supported by a team or an organization. And as we dive into the details, the IESBA received queries from various stakeholders already on this. Would these factors be only at an individual level, and how would this apply to the team and organization? So the proposed definition of the external expert focuses on the individual. So when the professional accountant is evaluating the expert's competencies, capabilities, and objectivity, it's mainly about the person overseeing the expert's work. But keep in mind, experts often have a team, and the expert's responsibility to figure out what needs to be done to ensure that the team is also meeting those requirements. So for external experts in audit and assurance engagements, the IESBA believes that objectivity should be assessed for everyone on the team of experts that have been used in the work. And in line with the heightened expectations, stakeholders have suggested that this is also required from both the external expert and their supporting teams. This approach also aligns with other provisions that we have in part 4 of the independence requirements for all assurance teams members. Next slide, please. So for external experts in audit and assurance engagement, there's a heightened public interest which necessitates additional application material and additional CCO evaluation. While we say this is for audit and assurance, bear in mind this also equally applies to the sustainability assurance provisions in the proposed part 5 of the code. It is capturing on that notion of objectivity, but it's providing a framework that would be something that will be a little bit more comprehensive and allows for more reliability and more efforts to make sure that the public interest is supported. Laurie, can I hand over to you?
Yes, I'm just going to come off mute. Thanks, Saadiya and Kam, for the details that you've gone through. The objectivity evaluation is an important part of this process. We have the CCO, competence, capability, and objectivity. Objectivity being obviously the O in that. The PA is required to request information from the external expert in relation to the entities at which the expert is performing work and with respect to the period of the engagement and the period covered by the audit or assurance report. And that information that needs to be provided relates to specific interests or relationships or circumstances. It is aligned with the independence attributes set out in Part 4A or 4B. I'm going to take a moment just to mention here something that not everybody on the call may realize. Keep in mind that unless the expert is already a PA, they are not covered by the IESBA code. So simply saying that experts must comply with part 4 of the code doesn't really work because the experts themselves are rarely covered by the code. This new standard pulls them in under the evaluation of the fundamental principle of objectivity under which independence sits. So that's sort of how that fits together. The PA, in applying this, cannot simply accept the information provided without appropriately applying the conceptual framework of the code. And keep in mind what the conceptual framework of the code is. It's around identifying threats, evaluating the significance of those threats to independence, and applying safeguards to eliminate or reduce those threats to an acceptable level. And if that can't happen, then obviously in that case, the expert couldn't be used. If we move to the next slide, what are these key attributes? Many of you who are familiar with the code will recognize them. They are pulled from Part 4A and 4B of the code, and I'm not going to read. This is a very busy slide, by the way, and we will make these slides available. I saw that question pop up, and I just thought we would mention that now because some of you will use those, and they may be helpful to you as you consider your exposure draft comments. These attributes you will recognize stem from the existing code and cover things such as direct financial interests, either material or otherwise, any loans or guarantees, and these attributes almost all relate to the external expert and their immediate family, again, as is already standard in the code. So there's parts B, C, and D relate to any loan type relationships. Part E, close business relationship between the external expert and the employing organization or the entity that it's working on. As we move forward to the other side, previous or current engagements between the external expert, how long the external expert have been associated, so a long association question, so that can be assessed. Any position of a director or officer in the entity by the expert or immediate family members, any previous public statements, and now we're moving into some of the issues that might also pick up things like conflicts of interest, which also impact objectivity, fees or contingent fees, benefits received by the experts, any we use the word directly, conflict of interest that the expert might have, and then nature and extent of any interest and relationships with the controlling owners of the entity that the expert is working on. So the proposed external expert will need to provide relevant information on these numerous attributes so that the PA or the assurance provider, as it may be, can assess those and apply the conceptual framework and consider as part of the competence, capability, and objectivity assessment. In that way, the independence attributes have been pulled directly in to the assessment of experts. And again, keep in mind, experts themselves are not covered by the code. And so this is how we've ensured that happens and ensured that those independence items are considered and the conceptual framework is applied to assess those issues, assess their significance, and eliminate or reduce any threats to objectivity that could take place. Kam, I'm going to pass back over to you. Oh, sorry, one last comment I was going to make. Some people have raised a concern, and I think it's a bit of a hypothetical concern, but it's not one we haven't considered, around the impact of a standard that impacts the use of experts on the availability of experts. For example, if experts are required to be objective, and that includes a significant amount of assessment of their independence, does that limit the availability of experts to do work, especially in jurisdictions which may have fewer experts? The task force considered this in great detail, including suggestions there that possibly transparency could be introduced as a mitigating action. For example, noting that the expert had limitations on its independence and objectivity, but using them anyway. The task force determined that this was not appropriate in the circumstance because it A, allowed an easy exit, but B, because of the significant public interest in the ability of users of reporting to be able to rely on the use of experts by the PA or the assurance provider. Competence, capability, and objectivity is a critical part of that. It can't be less relevant or lower in different jurisdictions. And I would note that many of you know that we have jurisdictions of all sizes and shapes around the world, but even jurisdictions that people consider smaller and less with less availability of expertise have significant clients and significant entities that are involved in the capital markets and on which stakeholders and users are relying. And so we decided that objectivity is an ethical principle. It can't be adjusted to a different threshold, but that there may be things that can be done, and we'll continue to work on this, and your comments are welcome as well. Whether experts from another jurisdiction can be used, whether there might be for a period of time a scope limitation with regard to those issues, and whether we can consider transitional provisions as the new standard comes into effect. So just a footnote that concern has been considered, but given the importance of the work of experts and the reliance and the public interest, it was determined that we would not have a different threshold. So Kam, I'm going to hand back to you so that we can address some questions.
Thank you, Laurie. So I've been seeing some questions coming in, and I am also aware that we have about 8 minutes left of this webinar. The slides will be, as Laurie mentioned, made available to everyone after the webinar, along with the recording. But given the time that we have left, and we've covered many of the key principles already within this webinar, we would like to take some of the questions that have been received. So the first one I would like to ask, and maybe I'll post this to Laurie, is, does the evaluation of the external expert's CCO need to be concluded before the external expert begins its work, or before the PA agrees the terms of engagement with the external expert?
Great, Kam, thanks for that. That's a good question. The short answer to that is no. It must be done before the work is concluded very clearly, to make a determination of whether the expert is considered objective, and that piece of the analysis in terms of reliability. But this is a really practical implementation question. In practice, it may not always be practical to wait until the CCO evaluation is entirely completed before an external expert is engaged or starts work. There may be unavoidable constraints. Those of us in practice recognize that. For example, there can be a tight window within which an external expert can complete the work, and time is needed for the external expert to secure the information requested to provide to the assurance provider or PA to do the CCO evaluation. So in those cases, those might be taking place in parallel. I think as practitioners, we all realize that poses a certain element of risk. You need to get that done as soon as you can, early, to know that you'll be able to rely on that individual's work. So early, yes, but not before any pencil is picked up. So hopefully that helps, Kam.
Thank you, Laurie. And another question we've received is, with respect to competence, capability, and objectivity. So maybe I'll ask this, pose this to Saadiya. Is competence and capability synonymous?
So the task group in the IESBA evaluated this very closely, and it's something that we do explain the explanatory memorandum about how we see this here. Remember, the code is based on fundamental principles that uses some of these words, and we had to go back to see what those factors are. We don't see this as an overlap. We see them as standalone, and that it's a balance of all three of these that are needed. So the competence and capabilities, it will have to do with what the expert is as a competence, but capabilities would be other factors in terms of time, availability of information, pressures that they may experience as well. So you might be competent, but in a given scenario, you might not be capable because of extenuating circumstances.
Thank you, Saadiya. We also have a question with respect to R 390.8, and that maybe I'll, for ease, I'll move back the slide to 390.8 right here. This is the additional objectivity evaluation. So there was a question on whether or not the information required to perform this requirement, can it be built into agreeing the terms of the contract with the external expert? And I'll just switch between our two esteemed presenters. Laurie, I'll pose this to you.
Sorry, Kam, can you, I just am having trouble hearing you.
Yeah, my apologies. So I wanted to ask, this was one of the questions. So in terms of the independence attributes that are listed here, the information is required to be obtained in relation to these independence attributes from the external expert. And therefore, the question was whether or not these the requirements for these informations, can they be built into the contract when agreeing the terms of engagement with the external expert?
Oh, I think certainly. And I think, in terms of contracting, which is, obviously a slightly outside the purview of, what we're doing here, most organizations will be clear about their expectations of the experts. I mean, just purely as a risk management function, as a fundamental core requirement of the contractual provisions. Kam, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I mean, I would say, without getting too deep into contracting, this might form an appendix to the contract, et cetera, of what is required to be provided. But, I'm not here to give legal advice, but yes, I think the requirement that the expert provide information and the nature of that information can be included as part of the contractual relationship.
Yeah, and absolutely. And within the provisions, 390.5, we do include provisions and expectations in terms of what are the expectations on the information needed. So like Laurie said, it's up to you at the end of the day how you end up contracting it, but we do within the requirement state that the expectations on information needed should be outlined. One other question, Laurie. So with respect to all these independence attributes, are they essentially prohibitions, or are external experts meant to be independent based on this, or is this information taken to be evaluated?
It's taken to be evaluated, and obviously that's where the discussion around the conceptual framework comes in. The PA is going to have to apply the conceptual framework and make a determination whether there is any that, first of all, identifying any threats that come from this information, evaluating the significance of those threats, and then applying safeguards to either eliminate or reduce those threats. And we know in the context of independence, assurance providers generally know how to do that. There are things you can do to reduce or eliminate those threats. They can't be ignored, but obviously, to answer the question, it's being done for the PA to evaluate those. Keep in mind, the PA is the one who is subject to the code and the independence provisions and the other ethical provisions of the code. So they've got to determine whether the expert is objective and therefore can be relied upon. Does that make sense, Kam?
Yes, absolutely.
Or to the question?
Yeah.
Person posing the question.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Laurie and Saadiya. I'm cognizant that we've reached the top of the hour. I do want to thank everyone for their time, for joining this webinar, and also for submitting your questions. We didn't have time to respond live to all the questions on this webinar, but we will be evaluating all the questions in conjunction with all the comment letters received as well, in finalizing the standard #1 and also seeing if there are any other types of non-authoritative guidance that might be needed in the future. And again, I do want to thank everyone. Laurie, Saadiya, any additional remarks from either of you?
I would just like to thank everyone. I see a fair number of questions that came in. What we will do is endeavor to pick those up as part of, definitely, we won't just endeavor to pick those up as part of the exposure draft process, and make sure we're addressing those. But please, for anybody who's confused, please do reach out if it helps you in drafting your exposure draft comments. We're happy to have a side discussion with you on any of those comments if it helps clarify something for you.
The same. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to the engagement. The question and answers kind of gave us a tidbit of what's to come, but looking forward to the comments both offline and via the comment process.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And with that, I will end the webinar here. Thank you.